Snow was falling slowly from the dark sky, covering the small town in a white blanket. The streets were quiet, lights glowing faintly through the mist of the storm. A lonely German shepherd wandered through the empty roads, his fur wet and heavy from the snow. He had no home, no collar, no name. For weeks, he had been roaming from one street to another, looking for food, warmth, or a kind face. But no one stopped for him anymore. People shut their doors tight in winter, and stray dogs were forgotten in the cold. He walked with his head down, leaving deep paw prints behind him. His ribs showed faintly under his coat. Sometimes he stopped near a trash bin, hoping for a leftover piece of bread. But there was nothing tonight. The cold wind blew harder, and the snow began to sting his face. He shook himself, his breath coming out like little clouds. For a moment, he thought of stopping near a broken car by the side of the road. The space underneath could give him some shelter from the cold. He started to crawl under it when something strange reached his ears. It was a sound. Very faint, almost lost in the wind. It came and went like a whisper. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching. It wasn't the sound of another dog, or the rumble of a corrit was softer. It sounded like a cry. He stood still for a few seconds, listening carefully. There it was again. A tiny, weak cry. It made him tilt his head, confused but curious. Then something in his heart stirred. He had heard that kind of sound before, long ago, when he lived with people. When the small human of his old family used to cry, he would go sit beside the crib until she smiled again. The memory was faint, but it was enough to make him move. He began to walk toward the sound. His paws sank into the snow, and the cold bit harder, but he didn't stop. The cry came again, clearer this time. It was coming from the park ahead, a place now hidden under a deep layer of snow. The dog quickened his pace, his body tense with worry. He slipped once, then climbed back up, leaving a trail behind him. The closer he got, the louder the cry became. It wasn't a dream or a sound of the wind. It was real, and it was coming from something small and helpless. He reached the park fence and pushed through the opening. The park was silent except for the wind and that heartbreaking sound. He followed it across the frozen path, past the trees weighed down by snow, until he saw something near an old bench. There was a small bundle there, almost covered by snow. The dog sniffed the air, his breath quick and visible. He moved closer, cautious but gentle. The smell was unfamiliar but innocent. He nudged the snow away with his nose, and what he saw made him freeze in place. Inside that thin blanket was a baby, tiny, pale, and shaking. Its little hands moved weakly, and tears ran down its cold cheeks. The dog whined softly, taking a step back as if afraid to hurt it. Then he lowered his head again and sniffed closer. The baby cried louder, and something inside the dog's chest tightened. He couldn't leave it. He didn't understand why the baby was there or where its family had gone. But his heart knew one thing: it needed warmth, and it needed help. The wind blew again, covering them both in snowflakes. The dog barked once, sharp and loud, as if calling out to the world. No one answered. The town was asleep. He looked around but saw no movement, no light. Only darkness and snow. The baby cried again, weaker now. He made a small whimpering sound, then slowly circled the tiny form. Carefully he lay down beside it, pressing his body close to share his warmth. The blanket moved a little as the heat spread from his thick fur to the small, shivering child. The baby quieted a little, still breathing weakly. The dog stayed still, guarding the small one with his body. His fur began to frost over, but he didn't move away. Every few minutes he lifted his head and barked again, hoping someone might hear, but no one came. He licked the baby's face gently, trying to wake it when its breathing slowed. The snow fell heavier, covering his back, but he didn't care. His body ached, his paws hurt, and his stomach was empty, but he refused to leave that little bundle alone in the cold. Hours passed. The sky grew darker, and the streets quieter. He thought of moving again, searching for someone, but he couldn't risk leaving. Instead, he pressed closer, curling his tail around the baby to block the wind. His heart beat strong, even though his body shivered. Something about the child gave him a reason to stay alive that night. It was as if protecting it was the only thing that mattered now. He didn't know if morning would come for them both. But he stayed, listening to the slow rhythm of the baby's breaths. Sometimes the sound faded, and he would nudge the little one with his nose, afraid it might stop. The baby would stir a little, and relief would flood through him. The world around them was silent except for the snow crunching under his shifting paws and the low hum of wind sweeping across the frozen park, deep in the night. He looked up at the sky. Snowflakes drifted down gently, covering his head and muzzle. He felt tired, but peaceful. The world might have forgotten him, but he hadn't forgotten how to care. He had been astray for so long that kindness had almost left his heart, but now it returned, warm and strong. This small life beside him gave his lonely existence a new purpose. He would keep the baby safe, no matter how cold or how long the night lasted. He stayed like that, his body a shield against the storm, his eyes half closed but always watching. Each breath he took turned into white clouds that mixed with the baby's faint breaths. Two lost souls, one human, one dog fighting the cold together. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded faintly, echoing through the valley. The dog lifted his head slightly, listening again for footsteps or a voice. Nothing came. So, he put his head back down and wrapped himself tighter around the baby. The night dragged on, cold and endless. But the dog never gave up. He was no longer just a stray wandering the streets. He had become a guardian of something precious. The snow kept falling, but beneath it, a quiet warmth grew between the two. And as the stars dimmed behind the clouds, the German shepherd stayed awake, his heart beating strong, keeping hope alive for the tiny life beside him. The morning light was weak and pale as it touched the frozen park. Snow covered everything, turning the world silent and still. The German shepherd slowly opened his eyes. His fur was stiff with frost, and his body ached from the long night. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he heard a soft sound beside him, a faint cry. The baby. He turned quickly, his ears alert, and saw the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The child's lips were pale, but the breath was still there, faint but steady. The dog made a low sound in his throat, half a sigh, half relief. He had kept the baby alive through the night. He lifted his head and looked around the park. Snow still fell, though not as heavily as before. The world looked calm, almost too calm. He barked once, his voice echoing through the emptiness, but no one came. The streets were quiet, the houses far away. He didn't understand why no one was looking for the child. His tail gave a small twitch as he looked back at the baby. It moved slightly, crying weakly again, and his heart felt something deep, something more than duty. It felt like love. He stood up slowly, shaking the snow off his fur. The baby shivered and he bent down again, pushing the blanket closer with his nose. But the little one needed more than warmth now. It needed help. People, food, care. The dog understood that. He wasn't just a stray anymore. He had become a protector, and protectors had to find help, even if it meant risking everything. He barked again, louder this time, hoping the sound would reach someone. The wind carried it away. Still, he didn't stop. He barked again and again, then listened carefully. Only silence answered him. He turned his eyes toward the road at the edge of the park, where faint tire marks disappeared under the snow. He looked back at the baby, unsure of what to do. He couldn't leave it, but he also couldn't carry it. He whined softly, walking in small circles, thinking in the only way a dog could think, through heart, not reason. Then he made a choice. He walked a few steps away from the baby, then stopped and barked again, louder, sharper. He ran a few feet toward the road, then back to the baby, pacing quickly, leaving deep marks in the snow. It was like he was trying to lead someone, anyone, to this spot. Again he barked, his breath steaming in the cold. Minutes passed, maybe hours. He didn't know. The baby's cries grew weaker. Desperation filled him. He barked until his throat hurt, then lay down again beside the child to warm it once more, as the morning turned to afternoon. The sun peeked through the clouds for the first time in days. Its light touched the frost on his fur, making it shimmer. The dog felt tired but kept his eyes open. He didn't trust the world to take care of the baby yet. The cold wind softened a little, and he let out a slow breath. He rested his muzzle on the snow near the baby's tiny hand. The child's fingers twitched, brushing his fur. The gentle touch made him freeze for a second. Then he closed his eyes and pressed closer. Somewhere far away, footsteps crunched on the snow. The dog's ears lifted instantly. He raised his head, listening carefully. A man was walking along the path near the park fence. He wore a heavy coat and scarf, his breath visible in the cold air. The dog barked loudly, standing up quickly. The man stopped, startled. The bark came again, strong and urgent. The man turned, looking around, confused. The park looked empty from where he stood. He started to walk again, but the bark repeated, short, sharp, almost pleading. The tone made him stop. He stepped closer to the park entrance, pushing through the snow. His boots sank deep, but he followed the sound. The dog kept barking, not moving away from the baby. When the man finally saw them, he froze. For a moment, he didn't understand what he was seeing. A large German shepherd, fur covered in ice, standing guard over a small shape in the snow. Then the blanket moved, and he realized it was a baby. "Oh my God," he whispered. He rushed forward, kneeling beside them. The baby let out a weak cry as the man carefully pulled the blanket open. His eyes widened in shock. "It's alive," he said softly. He took off his coat and wrapped it around the child. The dog didn't move, watching closely, his body tense but calm. He wanted to make sure this stranger meant no harm. The man looked at him and blinked. Did you do this?" he said in disbelief. The dog wagged his tail once but didn't back away. The man pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called for help. "Yes, I found a baby and a dog in the park," he said quickly. "The baby's freezing, but alive. Please hurry." He gave the address and kept talking, his voice trembling. When he hung up, he looked at the shepherd again. "You're a hero," he murmured, reaching out slowly. The dog sniffed his hand, then licked it once. Minutes later, sirens sounded in the distance. The dog barked once more as if answering them. Soon, flashing lights filled the park as police cars and an ambulance arrived. Paramedics ran toward the scene, carrying blankets and equipment. They lifted the baby gently, checking its pulse and breathing. One of them gasped softly. "It's a miracle," she said. "The baby's alive. Barely, but alive." The dog whined, stepping forward as they carried the baby away. One of the officers knelt and patted his head. "Good boy," he said. "You saved that baby." The shepherd didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was kind, full of warmth, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The baby was placed inside the warm ambulance. The dog stood there, snow melting off his fur, watching as the doors closed. He barked once, softly, as if saying goodbye. One of the officers turned to the shelter worker who had arrived and said, "Make sure he's taken care of. That dog's a hero." And the shepherd didn't resist when they led him to a van. He looked back one more time, toward the ambulance before stepping inside. His heart felt strange, not sad, but not at peace either. He had done what he could. The baby was safe now. As the van drove away, he curled up quietly, resting for the first time in days. He didn't know that the story of what he did was already spreading fast that soon. People everywhere would be talking about the brave stray who had heard a baby crying in the snow and refused to walk away. He didn't know he had changed 2 lives that night. The baby's and his own. The van stopped in front of the town's small animal shelter. The German shepherd lifted his head as the door opened. The worker who had brought him there spoke softly. "It's all right, boy. You're safe now." The dog looked around, his eyes scanning the strange place. There were cages lined up on both sides, the air filled with the sounds of barking and whining. The smell of food, disinfectant, and other animals filled the room. He hesitated for a moment, but then stepped inside quietly. The staff could see he wasn't an ordinary stray. He looked weak and cold, but his eyes were calm, filled with something deeper. They placed a blanket on the floor of a warm kennel and gave him food and water. He ate slowly, still thinking about the baby. The memory of that tiny face wrapped in the blanket stayed in his mind. Even as he rested, his ears would twitch every time he heard a child's cry or laughter somewhere outside. In the hospital across town, the baby was fighting for life. Doctors worked quickly, warming the little body, wrapping it in soft blankets, and checking for injuries. The nurses couldn't believe how the baby had survived the freezing night. If that dog hadn't found him, one nurse said softly, this child would have never made it till morning. The story began to spread quickly. From the police station to the hospital, everyone talked about the brave stray who had saved a life. News reporters came to the park later that day. They filmed the small spot under the bench where the baby had been found. The snow still showed the marks of the dog's paws. People who watched the news that evening were touched deeply. Some cried, others smiled with disbelief. How can a stray dog show such heart? One old man said while watching the screen. Sometimes animals have more kindness than people.
Oh.
At the shelter, volunteers started calling him Guardian. It was the name one of the workers suggested. He guarded that baby all night, she said, smiling softly. Guardian fits him. The name stayed. Even though the dog didn't understand human words, every time someone said Guardian, his ears lifted. It was as if he knew it meant something special. Days passed. The baby slowly recovered in the hospital. Reporters continued to talk about this story, and soon, people began visiting the shelter to see the heroic dog. Some brought treats, others took photos. Children pressed their faces against the glass, waving and calling, "Good boy, Guardian." He would wag his tail gently, but his eyes often turned toward the door. He seemed to be waiting for someone. Maybe the baby. Maybe the same small voice that had made him run through the snow that night. One afternoon, a kind woman named Helen came to the shelter. She was one of the nurses who had cared for the baby. She had seen how hard Guardian had fought that night and wanted to make sure he was doing well. She entered his kennel slowly, sitting on the floor beside him. Guardian sniffed her hand carefully, then licked her fingers. Helen smiled softly and said, "You're a good boy. You saved that little one." Her voice was warm, and for a moment, Guardy rested his head on her lap. Helen took a photo of him and showed it to the doctors at the hospital. The staff there couldn't believe how gentle he looked. "He's a hero," said one of them. "He deserves a home." The hospital started a small charity drive to support the shelter and Guardian's care. People sent donations, toys, and food. Letters came from children thanking him for being brave. Someone even drew a picture of him curled up beside the baby under the snow with the words, "Guardian Angel Dog." But Guardian didn't understand fame or kindness. What he understood was connection. Every time the shelter lights dimmed at night, he would curl up in his blanket, his mind returning to that night. The sound of the baby's cry still echoed in his heart. It had given his lonely life a purpose, and now that the baby was safe somewhere else, he missed that feeling. One evening, while volunteers were cleaning, Guardian suddenly stood and barked toward the entrance. A familiar scent reached him, faint but recognizable. The door opened, and Helen walked in, holding something wrapped in a soft blanket. Inside was the same baby he had saved. The hospital had arranged a special visit after the baby recovered. Guardian froze for a second, staring. The baby made a small sound, not a cry, but a soft coo. The dog's tail started wagging slowly. Helen walked closer and knelt down, showing the child to him. "Do you remember your friend?" she whispered. The baby reached out a tiny hand, touching Guardian's nose. He stayed perfectly still, eyes soft, heart full. The room went quiet as everyone watched. The baby giggled, and Guardian gave a low, happy bark, as if laughing back. Helen smiled through tears. "He never forgot," she said. "He really does remember." The baby's hand tugged lightly at his fur, and Guardian lowered his head beside the small bundle. Just like that night in the snow, the moment touched everyone in the room. Cameras clicked, but Guardian didn't notice. His world was just that small child, alive, warm, and smiling. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace. When Helen left the shelter that day, she turned to the manager and said, "He shouldn't stay here forever." That dog belongs in a home with love, not behind a cage. The manager nodded. We've already had adoption offers, she said. But we're waiting to see if the baby's family wants to take him. Days later, the hospital finally found the baby's family. They were overjoyed and couldn't stop thanking the rescuers and everyone involved. When they heard about the dog that had saved their child, they were deeply moved. We owe him everything, the mother said softly, holding her baby close. If he hadn't been there, we would have lost our child. That evening, the shelter phone rang. It was the baby's family. They wanted to meet Guardian the next morning. The German Shepherd was sitting near the kennel door when he heard familiar footsteps. He lifted his head quickly. The same scent, that same soft warmth he remembered from the night of the snow, filled the air again. The door opened, and the family walked in, holding the baby. The father bent down, looking into Guardian's eyes. "Hey, boy," he said gently. "You remember us, don't you?" Guardian didn't bark. He just wagged his tail slowly, stepping forward until his nose touched the baby's tiny hand. The child laughed again. The mother's eyes filled with tears. "He still protects him," she whispered. In that small moment, everyone in the shelter knew something special had happened. Guardian's waiting had ended. The baby he had saved was safe, healthy, and now reaching for him again. He had no words to explain what he felt, but his actions said everything. His tail wagged, his ears lowered, and his heart finally rested. As the family left that day, Guardian watched them go, his golden eyes full of quiet joy. He didn't know that soon they would come back not just to visit, but to take him home for good. That night, as he curled up in his blanket, a soft warmth spread inside him again. He had found his purpose once more. The snow outside might fall endlessly, but for Guardian, it no longer mattered. He had protected life, and now that life was calling him back. The next morning came with soft sunlight touching the small windows of the animal shelter. The air was cold but peaceful. Guardian woke up and stretched slowly. He had slept better than usual. The smell of breakfast filled the room, and the sounds of other dogs barking echoed softly in the hallway. A worker came to clean his kennel and smiled. "Good morning, Guardian," she said kindly. "You've got some special visitors today." He tilted his head, not understanding the words but catching the tone. His tail wagged once. He stood up, ears forward, waiting. Minutes later, the shelter door opened, and a familiar scent reached him. His heart jumped before he even saw them. The baby's family had returned. The father carried the little child, wrapped in a thick blue blanket. The mother walked beside him, smiling through tears. They knelt down in front of Guardian's kennel. The baby laughed as soon as it saw him. The dog stepped closer to the fence, tail wagging fast now. The father said softly, "Hey, buddy. You remember us, don't you?" Guardian barked once, a happy sound. The mother looked at the shelter staff and said, "We came to take him home." The staff looked surprised but happy. "You mean adopt him?" she asked. The mother nodded, eyes shining. "Yes, he saved our child's life. He deserves to be part of our family." Everyone in the shelter smiled that day. Papers were signed, and the staff prepared Guardian for his new home. They brushed his fur, clipped his nails, and gave him a new collar with a shiny silver tag that read Guardian. When the family was ready, the door opened, and he stepped outside. It was the first time in weeks he had felt the fresh air of freedom without the cold biting into his bones. The sunlight warmed his back, and he looked up at the family waiting near the car. The baby reached out again, laughing happily, and Guardian walked straight toward them. The ride home was calm. The baby sat in the mother's arms, smiling every time Guardian turned his head from the back seat. He sat quietly, watching the snowy streets pass by. He didn't bark or move around. He just looked out the window as if trying to understand where life was taking him next. When they reached the house, Guardian stepped out carefully. It was a cozy little home with a garden and a wooden fence. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the air smelled like bread and warmth. The father opened the gate, saying, "Welcome home, Guardian." The dog sniffed around slowly, exploring every corner. He could smell fresh grass under the snow, flowers near the porch, and the faint scent of other dogs from the neighborhood. The baby giggled again, waving a small hand toward him. The mother placed the baby's basket on the living room rug, and Guardian lay beside it, resting his head close. The child reached out and touched his ear gently. That one small touch was enough. Guardian knew this was his place now. From that day, life changed for him. No more cold nights under cars, no more hunger or fear. He had a bed near the fireplace and bowls filled with food and clean water. But what he loved most wasn't food or comfort. It was the sound of the baby's laugh. Every time the little one made a sound, Guardian's ears perked up. When the baby cried, he would walk over and rest his head beside the crib until the child quieted again. Days turned into weeks. The bond between them grew stronger. When the baby learned to crawl, Guardian followed closely, always careful not to step on tiny hands. When the baby learned to stand, he stood behind, steady and still, as if ready to catch him if he fell. The parents watched with smiles, sometimes tears, amazed by how gentle he was. "He's not just a pet," the father said one evening, watching them together. "He's a guardian angel." The story of Guardian continued to spread beyond the small town. Local newspapers wrote about him again, calling him the miracle dog. A television crew visited the house to record a short story about how he had saved the baby and now lived with the same family. The camera crew expected a nervous dog, but Guardian stayed calm. When the reporter asked him to sit beside the baby for a photo, he sat proudly, eyes bright and calm. The picture of the smiling baby holding Guardian's fur was shared everywhere. People sent letters again, saying things like, "You remind us that kindness still exists, and Guardian shows us what true love means." But Guardian didn't care about cameras or stories. His world was small and simple. It was the house, the family, and the baby he had saved. Every evening, he would sit by the front door watching the snow fall, his eyes full of quiet peace. Sometimes he would bark softly as if talking to the night sky. The baby would crawl to him, touching his tail or ear, and he would lie down gently, letting the child climb over him like a mountain. One stormy night, thunder rolled across the sky and the power went out. The baby started crying in the dark, frightened by the noise. Guardian moved instantly, placing himself beside the crib. The glow from the lightning flashed across his golden eyes. He stayed there all night, listening to the rain and the wind, never moving an inch. By morning, when the storm ended, the baby was sleeping peacefully again, one small hand resting on his paw. The mother found them like that and whispered softly, "You really are our guardian." Winter slowly faded into spring. The snow melted, and the grass returned. The family began taking walks in the park, the same park where everything had begun. Guardian walked beside the stroller, tail wagging gently, eyes scanning the path like a quiet protector. Sometimes he would pause near the old bench where he had found the baby. He would sniff the ground, then look up at the family with calm eyes. It was as if he remembered everything's a cold, the loneliness, the moment he had chosen to stay. The father once knelt beside him and said quietly, "You saved our world that night, boy. You didn't just save a life, you gave us hope." Guardian leaned forward and licked his hand, tail moving slowly. Seasons passed, but his devotion never changed. Every night, he still slept near the baby's bed, even after the child learned to walk and talk. Every morning, he greeted the family with gentle joy, wagging his tail and waiting for his share of affection. He was no longer a stray, no longer forgotten. He was home, and whenever the baby laughed, his ears lifted, his heart filled again, with warmth, the same warmth he had felt that snowy night when he first heard that fragile cry. It had changed everything. He had followed a sound in the darkness and found not just a life to protect, but a family to love. Guardian wasn't just a name anymore. It was who he was and who he would always be. The years passed slowly, and the seasons changed again and again. The baby Guardian had saved that snowy night was no longer a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He had grown into a bright and cheerful little boy named Noah. His laughter filled every corner of the house. And wherever Noah went, Guardian followed. The bond between them was unbreakable, like two souls connected by fate. Every morning, when sunlight poured into the house, Noah would run to the living room shouting, "Guardian, wake up." The big dog would open his eyes and wag his tail lazily before stretching his legs. Noah would throw his arms around his furry neck and whisper, "You're my best friend." Guardian never needed words to answer. A gentle wag of the tail, a warm look in his eyes, that was his way of saying the same thing back. The family loved watching them grow together. Noah's parents would smile every time they saw their son playing in the yard with the dog who had once saved his life. They often talked about that winter night, the one that had changed everything. If not for him, Noah's mother would say softly, "We might never have had this chance." The father would nod quietly and add, "He was meant to find us." Guardian had become more than just a pet. He was family, a gentle protector who always stayed near Noah. When the boy went to school, Guardian waited by the window, his ears twitching at every sound of footsteps outside. When the school bus came back in the afternoon, the dog would run to the gate, tail wagging fast. Ready to welcome his boy home? Noah would drop his bag on the ground and hug Guardian tightly every day, laughing, "I missed you." The people in the town still remembered the story of the brave stray. Sometimes when they went for walks, strangers would stop and say, "That's Guardian, the hero dog." Kids would ask to pet him, and he would stand calmly, patient, and kind. He never barked or snapped. He just wagged his tail and leaned into their touch. Noah would proudly say, "He's my dog. He saved me when I was a baby." The parents would smile softly, their hearts full. As years went by, Guardian began to grow older. His fur turned a little gray around the muzzle, and his steps slowed, but his eyes still shone with the same love and warmth. He didn't chase balls as fast as before, and he slept more often near the fireplace. But whenever Noah came near, he still lifted his head and wagged his tail. Noah noticed the change too. One night as he sat beside Guardian, he whispered, "You're getting old, huh?" The dog rested his head on the boy's lap, and Noah stroked his fur gently. "Don't worry," the boy said softly. "I'll take care of you, just like you took care of me." The bond between them grew deeper with time. When Noah had bad dreams, Guardian would climb up beside the bed and rest his head near the boy's pillow until he fell asleep again. When Noah got sick, Guardian wouldn't leave his side, watching over him day and night. The family sometimes said, "He understands more than words can tell." One snowy morning, years after that first night in the park, the family decided to visit that very place again. The snow fell softly, just like before, and the park looked peaceful. Noah, now tall enough to walk through the snow on his own, held Guardian's leash gently. The dog moved slowly, his paws pressing into the white ground, his eyes calm and thoughtful. They stopped by the same old bench, the one where Guardian had found the baby so many years ago. The father brushed snow off the seat, and they all stood quietly. Noah looked at the ground, imagining what that night must have been like. "It's hard to believe I was lying right here," he said softly. His mother nodded, eyes full of tears. "He never gave up on you, Noah. Not even when it was freezing." Noah knelt down in the snow and hugged Guardian. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved me, and you gave me a life." Guardian pressed his head against the boy's chest, his tail wagging slowly. The moment was silent, but full of meaning. The dog didn't need to understand the words. He felt them. That night, back home, the family lit a fire in the fireplace. Guardian lay on his blanket near the warmth, his body tired but content. Noah sat beside him, reading a story out loud. The sound of his voice filled the room softly, mixing with the crackle of the fire. Guardian's eyes grew heavy, but he stayed awake long enough to look at each face in the room, the family he had once saved, and who now loved him more than anything in the world. As time went on, Guardian began to move slower, and sometimes his legs trembled when he stood up. Noah, now a young teenager, always helped him gently, guiding him outside, brushing his fur, and feeding him by hand when needed. The family knew he was growing old, but they didn't speak of it much. They wanted every moment with him to be happy. One spring afternoon, the house was filled with sunlight, and the air smelled of flowers from the garden. Guardian lay under the tree, eyes half closed, listening to the sounds of birds and laughter. Noah sat beside him, resting his hand on his back. "You've had a long life, haven't you, boy?" he said quietly. The dog's tail moved slowly. "You saved me once. Noah continued softly. But you've kept saving me every day since then. You made me brave. Guardian looked up at the boy with eyes full of peace. The breeze lifted the fur on his neck, and he gave a soft sigh. His eyes closed, and he rested his head on his paws. The boy leaned closer, his heart heavy, but calm. He could feel the love in every breath the dog took. Later, when the sun began to set, Guardian slept deeply. His family gathered around him, their hands on his fur, their hearts full of gratitude. The house felt quiet and still, filled with the warmth of 1,000 memories. In the days that followed, the family planted a small tree in the yard, near Guardian's favorite spot by the fence. They placed a small stone beside it that read, "Guardian, our hero, our family." Our angel Noah sat beside that tree often, especially on winter nights when the snow began to fall. He would look up at the stars and whisper, "You'll always be my guardian." Sometimes, when the wind blew through the trees, it sounded almost like a soft bark in reply. Years later, when Noah grew up, he would tell his children the story of the brave dog who had found a baby crying in the snow. He told them how that dog had given him not just life, but courage, kindness, and love. And every time he spoke of that night, his voice softened, and his eyes shone with warmth. The legend of Guardian lived on in the town, told from one generation to another. But for Noah and his family, it was more than a story. It was their truth. It's their heart, their beginning. A stray once forgotten by the world had become a symbol of love that would never fade. The baby he had saved had grown into a man. But he never forgot that night, the night a lonely dog became an angel in the snow. And somewhere, in every snowflake that fell quietly from the sky, they felt his presence still watching, guarding and reminding them that kindness, no matter where it comes from, can change everything.